Hey guys, Craig here. This time we're going to be reviewing the Torchstar LED Recessed light. Now the LED Recessed light is a retrofit light that you can put in the similar hole that you would have a standard can light that's in most houses. About a year ago, we purchased a house and we wanted to do some remodeling. As part of that remodeling, we wanted to add a couple extra lights to a room that really had no recessed lighting. The rest of the downstairs had lighting, but our living room didn't have any. And so it was a little bit more of a darker area of the home. That's actually the room I'm in right now. So we originally looked at getting some retrofit can lights that we could put in place in the ceiling, just a couple of them. But it turns out those two can lights were actually more expensive than me purchasing 12 Torchstar LED can lights or recessed lights to replace all of them downstairs. And since we didn't want them to look different, where just one room had different looking can lights that were the retrofit ones, we decided to replace them all. Not only has it worked, we've had them here about 8 months now, but the light is great, they're dimmable, we've not had any issues with it. So not only are we going to review this product today, we're going to actually walk through the installation process, including how to remove the existing can lights that were built when the house was built, so they weren't retrofit lights, and how we actually remove those without disturbing the drywall and without causing a lot of damage that we have to repair later. First, let's take a look at what we already had in the ceiling. This is your standard recessed can light. It's in probably 80% of the homes built since 2000, and probably a lot more before then. If it's a standard flood bulb that goes inside of it, and although we could put LED bulbs in there, which we had already done to just be a little bit more efficient, it definitely isn't the same look as what we have with the Torchstar system. So if we talk about what's in that ceiling, first you have the can light fixture, and that's what you really see from the outside. It's just kind of a finish ring, and then on the inside of that is where the bulb will actually connect. If we turn it over, what you're going to see is there's a physical can, and that's why they're called can lights. It's a bit deep because it sits in the ceiling. There'll be a wiring box to the side of it, and it's all kind of one cohesive unit. Holding that in place, you'll see that there's actually metal bars and they expand based off the size of the joist. So when this is installed, when the house is built, they actually are going to put it in between the joists and they're going to hammer those spikes on either side of the joist, and it really kind of sets that can in place prior to the drywalling. So as we look at removing this, we have to first remove the can completely out of the bracket. And then once we do that, we have to kind of cut the cabling, get all that removed. And then ultimately we can take some snips, or in my case, I use the Sawzall, and we can cut through the plastic itself of the bracket and then turn it into kind of two pieces that are just small enough to slide through the hole. I know that sounds a little weird, but as you see when we go through it, it's a lot simpler. The only problem is you are kind of doing it blindly because you can't really see in the hole while your arm is in there, at least me with my arms. Now, before we get started, the first thing I want to point out is you have to turn off your breakers, right? Don't just rely on your light switch. Any electrician will tell you, a shock from, standard house voltage is not the best shock. Obviously, here in the US, we're on 110. Not going to be a pleasant shock, and you definitely don't want to get hit with it. So in our case, turned off all the breakers before we got started. Now, if you haven't done wiring, definitely contact an electrician. But if you are comfortable running some Romex and running some ceiling wire in there and then doing this retrofit, the actual install is pretty straightforward. So now let's talk about the process. First thing you want to do, remove the bulb. If you haven't already, go ahead and unscrew that bulb and pull it out. As we look up inside of it, you're going to see that there's not really any screws or anything weird. What you want to do, just grab that trim ring and just kind of yank it down. It's just press fit in there into the can, and it comes out pretty easy. Be prepared for a lot of dust and grime because, well, frankly, it's a house and you're going to get bugs up there. Once you've pulled that out, you need to understand that you are never going to use this can light again, right? These aren't retrofits. We're going to be cutting the bracket. So in my case, I simply cut the wires at this level because it was just easier to kind of work around them, or not work around them, to just get rid of them. So cut the wires, get them out of there. Now let's take a moment to look inside the can itself. You're going to see that on either side of the can, you're going to have probably 2, maybe 3 screws. We want to go ahead and remove those screws. And by removing those screws, we're actually releasing the can from the bracketry. The next thing you're going to see as you start to pull that can out, in my case, there was some wire plastic clips there. I had to kind of pop those away because they were restricting that can from moving freely. So I just took my little crowbar or a screwdriver, pop that plastic clip out, and you're going to be able to pull the can the rest of the way out. Once again, I know I'm not using this can light again, so I made the decision to go ahead and cut that pigtail, that wiring again, and let's get the can out of the way so I can get a little bit more room. I just used some heavier, dutier cutters, some more cable cutters here, and just kind of cut that whole thing off. All right, now that we have the can removed, we need to go ahead and take a look up in the ceiling, and you're going to see that there is a wiring box, and this is where the wire terminates for your standard power. It's going to terminate to the actual fixture itself. There's normally a door on either side. That's the nice thing. There's a service door on the inner side, so you don't tend to have to reach around the other side. So if you pop that open, you're going to see the wiring there. In my case, once again, I just kind of snipped the wiring. Sometimes they may be done with wire nuts. In my case, it was easier to just snip it. Now, after you've cut that wiring, we want to make sure that the wire that comes into that box is loose and pulled out of that box. Technically, that box has some plastic wedging, or there's a little bit of a plastic door, and that holds the wire or the Romex in there securely. So you're going to want to kind of take a screwdriver or a pry bar and either break that off or just loosen it up enough where you can pull the Romex out the other side, which is the wiring and the ceiling. And that'll really free up this fixture so that we can remove it. All right, now comes the fun part. So we've gone ahead and we've disconnected the wiring. This fixture, the can's out. It's completely dead fixture. We've already kind of cut it up a little bit. And now we have to take the circle of plastic, that entire bracket that we saw on the bench, and we need to cut it in two. So we want to split that circle in half. So I took the side with the wiring box, considered that my left half. The other side was my right half, and I cut right down the middle of that plastic, being careful not to score into the drywall too much so I don't have to repair it. But with a Sawzall, in my case, I was able to cut through that plastic and turn it into two pieces. Now that we have these in two pieces, we have the ability to pull it out through that hole. However, we need to disconnect the metal tabs that are pushed into the joist on either side. So what I did in my case, I was able to bend that plastic bracketry up, and then I could fit a crowbar up into the ceiling and kind of blindly poke it behind where I know those metal tabs are and just bend them away from the wood. They get hammered in there. Don't get too dejected if they don't come out simply. But eventually, after you've done your first one, the rest of them get a lot easier. I probably was doing a light every 10 minutes at that point, and I'm not a construction guy or an electrician, so it's not something that I do all the time. But you want to make sure that you get the tabs on both sides of the circle, on both pieces of the bracket. Remember, it's tied in 4 places against that joist, one to the left, or sorry, 2 to the left and 2 to the right. Once you have those tabs out, you'll be able to slowly and carefully take each individual piece and kind of wiggle it out through that circle. If you did it right, there won't be any damage. If you're finding that that piece is a little too big, go ahead and either take your saw or take some snips and cut a little bit more plastic off that ring of the ring of the circle, and you'll be able to fit it out. All right, guys, now that we've gone ahead and removed that can light, let's talk about wiring. So a standard can light in a ceiling is going to be wired in series. You're going to have the switch that's going to go to the first light, and then every light after that is just wired directly to that same circuit, that same series. So when we're looking at the wiring here, what you're going to see is that I've got 2 completely separate incoming wires. I don't have to really worry too much in this situation which one's coming from the switch. I just need to tie them together. So we want to make sure as we strip them, we put the 2 wires together, and then we take a pair of pliers and really twist those wires together so there's a good connection. We do all this before we put the wire nuts on. We are now ready to run our wires to the LED recessed light. The Torchstars have a wiring junction box that we need to run our ceiling wires into. Make sure you connect all the wiring inside the junction box, as we don't want those loose wires sitting in the ceiling, because that could be a fire hazard. But the wiring here really couldn't be more simple. The white wire for the light gets tied into the white ceiling wires. The black wire from the light gets tied into the black ceiling wires, and that leaves you with a green wire from the light. That's the ground, and that normally gets tied into a bare copper wire that's going to be from the ceiling. Go ahead and tie those all in, close up the junction box, and we're ready to move on to the next step. Now you can go ahead and shut your box, and we can push that box, the metal wiring box, back up into the ceiling. And then on the Torchstar system itself, we can pull the spring clips in on either side, and then just wiggle it up into that circle, and you should be good to go. All right, guys, now that's really the whole install. And let's talk about how it looks. So for me, I do enjoy LED light. I got more of a warm color, which is available now. It's not all blue. I don't like the blue LED lighting as much. So the more yellow color to me is better for a living space. So that warm color looks good. It can be a little too bright, so I do have dimmers hooked up to all of them because with all the additional light, this room can be pretty crazy. So I've got the dimmers turned down to probably about 75%. And because these are dimmable lights, there's no flickering, there's no blinking or anything like that. So for us, the Torchstars have been a pretty good buy. Like I said, they all have worked flawlessly. They all showed up working and in working condition. They all showed up with the right parts that were needed in it, including the wire nuts, the boxes, all that sort of thing. Really, the only complexity in this job was A, having a comfort level working with electricity, and B, removing the old can lights. I mean, that was really the most difficult part. So if you have some older looking can lights and they're looking kind of gunky, hey, I honestly recommend this. We purchased these with our own money once again. There is no sponsorship from Torchstar, but honestly, I can't find a fault in them. So, hey, give it a try.